in case you missed it, anybody out here watching, Israel bombed Doha, the capital of Qatar, in an attempt to kill the Hamas negotiating team and really elements of Hamas's leadership that are there as a part of the broader negotiations that are, allegedly about bringing the genocide to an end and various different things. But ultimately, here we are, big escalation in a major way on, a very important global state, small state, but plays a big role in global affairs. So to talk more about all of this and its repercussions, we are very, very honored to be joined once again by Giorgio Cafiero, who's the CEO of Gulf State Analytics. Giorgio, thanks so much for being with us.
Good to be with you guys.
Well, great to have you with us as always, and there's a lot to be said about this. I almost don't even know where to start. This was pretty shocking to me. Maybe I shouldn't have been shocked, but obviously, Qatar plays a big role in a lot of different global conflicts in terms of being a site of negotiation, a place where two sides can hash things out, and really is being a neutral arbiter that a lot of people around the world respect in terms of the ability to help facilitate these processes. And it seemed like they were playing this role, vis-a-vis what's been going on in Palestine. What are the repercussions of this, not just for Palestine, but for the overall issue of Doha as a site where, different forms of negotiations can take place?
Yeah, those are some really important questions. Definitely some very big questions. I think it's important to note that what the Israelis were one of Israel's objectives here was to really completely destroy the negotiations process. It is a really extreme move on Israel's part to target the third country that was hosting the negotiations that Israel and the United States were involved in. So I think the negotiations process is obviously dead. And I think what Israel wants to do is move ahead with the genocide and campaign of annihilation in Gaza with all its momentum and not pursue any sort of negotiations with Hamas through the Qatari channel or really any other channel right now. There are huge implications, though, because this strike is going to force not only Qatar, but the other Gulf Arab states to look at the security landscape very differently. Qatar, like the other GCC states, has long depended on the U.S. security umbrella to stay safe. And up until 2 days ago, the GCC countries were off limits to Israeli military aggression. That obviously came to an end. And so right now, the GCC states are not able to look at the United States the same way. Qatar is a non-NATO a major non-NATO ally of the U.S., the largest U.S. military footprint in the Middle East. This is the U.S. CENTCOM forward headquarters is based right outside of Doha at the Al Udeid base. Right now, the Qataris are wondering, what does any of this do to provide Qatar with security? The other GCC states are wondering the same thing too. So this is really creating a tremendous amount of concern in the Gulf, where leaders and policymakers are absolutely terrified about this new dynamic in which the Israelis can bomb a Gulf Arab capital and basically face no consequences, and do it with the U.S., if not, I wouldn't say the U.S. outright encouraged Israel to do it, but this is only possible because the U.S. allowed one of its allies to attack a GCC country.
Giorgio, I'm wondering how countries like Saudi Arabia or the Emirates might be feeling about all this. Obviously, they're not fans of the Qataris. Certainly, they don't like Hamas and wouldn't necessarily ever host them or anything like that. However, this demonstrates, like you said, the U.S. is supposed to be the security guarantor of these countries, and to just stand by and allow Israel to do as it pleases, or maybe even be complicit in it, who actually knows what the Trump administration did here, right? Suggests that hosting American bases does not protect you. Being subservient or allied with the Americans does not protect you from an increasingly reckless and deranged Israeli regime that wants a region of total hegemony. And if I'm Saudi Arabia, I might be thinking to myself, today it's Hamas. What if tomorrow they're upset about some economic deal. What, are they just going to bomb us and they can just do that now? Maybe not. Saudi Arabia is not thinking that, but I would be thinking that. I would be scared sitting in the region, no matter how close I was to the Americans, no matter how much I don't care about the genocide in Gaza. I would not want a region where Israel gets to be this hegemon that just has complete impunity everywhere. And so, yeah, I'm just curious what you think the conversations might be like in these states like the Emirates and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's recall that it was back in May when Trump went to Doha. He secured massive deals with the Qataris. They gave him, famously that they gifted him that luxurious jumbo jet. And there's a very special military relationship, defense relationship between the US and Qatar. So the other 5 GCC states have to be wondering, if Qatar was not protected from Israel, what do we have that Doha didn't have? And so they have to consider that if there's ever a figure from an organization that Israel deems a quote unquote terrorist group, what's to stop Israel from bombing, that individual on their soil? Let's also keep in mind, while there's the Hamas office in Doha, the Houthis were engaged in hostilities with Israel. They have a diplomatic presence in Oman, which has been the main location for Houthi dialogue with Western countries and Arab countries. So the Omanis have to certainly be concerned that Israel might target Oman under the premise of going after the Houthis. So all the GCC states basically feel that this attack on Qatar was really an attack on the GCC as an institution, and they all feel very threatened right now. You are right that in the past there's a whole history of tension between UAE and Qatar, Saudi Arabia and Qatar. But right now, the Gulf Arab monarchies are in a moment of solidarity with each other. I think their unity is going to strengthen. The fact that the president of the UAE, Mohammed bin Zayed, showed up in Doha the day after the attack. Mohammed bin Salman is using very strong language to condemn the Israeli aggression against Saudi Arabia's neighbor in the Gulf, also speaks to this dynamic. And we should point out that right now the GCC states, in this period of feeling very vulnerable to Israel's rogue and frankly lunatic behavior, they're going to seek new ways to achieve security. They do not believe that they can count on the US as they did count on the US in the past. There is not really any other country in the world, though, that has the A, willingness, and B, capacity to replace the United States as a security guarantor for all of the GCC states. So I think probably right now, the Gulf Arab monarchies of the GCC are going to try to focus on becoming more autonomous when it comes to their defense, building up military capacities that enable them to deter attacks and to carry out strikes in retaliation. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. This is a long-term project. But I think as a consequence of Israel bombing Doha 2 days ago, the Gulf Arab states are going to become more serious about trying to become more autonomous from the United States.
Well, that would certainly be momentous on multiple different levels. And in one area that, I think is notable in this regards in terms of many moves is whether or not you also think that there's a possibility that there could be increased diplomatic efforts by the Gulf states to, bring some sort of, further opprobrium on to Israel. I mean, I saw the PM of Qatar said, that Netanyahu must be brought to justice. Now, of course, Netanyahu isn't really leaving Israel, but, there's growing conversations. I mean, Smotrich and Ben Gvir have been banned from a number of European countries. I don't think it's going to happen, but obviously this threat in the UK of Isaac Herzog being arrested and the Friends of Al-Aqsa going to court to try to get him arrested. I would assume that if, the Gulf Arab states start to push more for, European countries and African countries and Latin American countries to deny airspace and, all these other places, that could stiffen the spine of people in other countries who are worried about blowback if they push to isolate Israel more. I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think the Gulf Arab states are going to be trying to convince more countries around the world to come to their defense and to take certain actions against Israel. I think, though, probably the most delicate and important question to look at is the state of relations between the two GCC states that have formalized diplomatic relations with Israel. It was this month, 5 years ago this month, the UAE and Bahrain entered into formal diplomatic relations with Israel. They normalized with Israel through the Abraham Accords. So a main question that many are asking right now is, is there a possibility of the UAE and or Bahrain pulling out of those normalization deals? I think probably right now at this point, we cannot expect either the UAE or Bahrain to go that far, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were to possibly downgrade diplomatic relations with Israel, make their rhetoric against Israel increasingly bold. And then if there are additional Israeli strikes on Doha or any other part of the Gulf, I think that's a card that they might choose to play down the line. I don't think they're going to do this at once, but that is some real leverage that two of Qatar's fellow GCC states do have. That would be a move that they could theoretically make, which would force Israel to pay a huge price for its rogue behavior in the Gulf.
Really stunning, because you have Netanyahu making this statement. I think it was maybe just yesterday, saying, speaking directly to the countries, but also saying to all countries sheltering, quote unquote terrorists, expel them or bring them to justice, or we will. And then saying we're no different from America after 9/11, and then saying countries condemning Israel should be ashamed, blah, 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 blah. But all that's to say, I mean, that the message there, and the Israelis have been saying this for a couple of weeks, is that we're going to pursue Hamas abroad, right? And they obviously chose Doha over Istanbul for a reason. I mean, I think there would have been more consequences to hitting Hamas officials in a place like Istanbul. Turkey has a very, qualified military, very decent weapons. They know how to fight wars. They've done it recently, regardless of what you think about those wars. So all that's to say, I think the Israelis recognize there are more consequences to that. However, a few weeks ago, if you told me that the Israelis would bomb Doha, I would have called you crazy. So what are the chances this extends at some point to Turkey? And could we, do you foresee a scenario where the Israelis are messing with Turkey that way, and there's like a broader war between the two of them playing out? Because, I don't have any romantic ideas of Turkey taking on the Israelis, but I do think if they were attacked by the Israelis, they would actually fight back.
Well, obviously, the most important point to bring up here is that Turkey's a NATO member. So there is Article 5 that has to be considered. That would do a lot more to test NATO than the Russian invasion of eastern Ukraine. Of course, keep in mind, Ukraine partnered with NATO countries, but it's not an official NATO ally. Turkey actually is. So, I mean, let's be honest. What if Israel is going to attack Turkey? Is the United States going to come to Turkey's defense? I don't think that would happen. So then that really would demonstrate that NATO as an alliance is totally obsolete. That would raise the stakes very high. I also do not think that any European countries would take military action against Israel if they did that. That's a very serious scenario to consider. I have learned in the post-October 7th world that it's very foolish to say, oh, Israel would never do this. I think it's possible that Netanyahu would not be so foolish as to do that. But I don't want to say this is something Israel would never do. I think it's not wise to rule out anything at this point.
Well, this is why we always bring you on, Giorgio, because you're very level-headed and very calm, cool, and collected about not making any wild predictions, but just giving us the facts as we know them and from your excellent sources all across the region. So we are honored to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Giorgio Cafiero, CEO of Gulf State Analytics, and I have to say, a new doting father as well. Congratulations to you and your wife.
Thank you. Thank you both.